This is Dan Pertu, and for this episode in my Muse in Music video blog, I am so happy to be interviewing the world-renowned conductor, Maestra JoAnn Falletta. A winner of multiple Grammy Awards, JoAnn serves as music director of the Buffalo Philharmonic and the Connie and Mark Jacobson Music Director Laureate of the Virginia Symphony, principal guest conductor of the Brevard Music Center, and artistic advisor to the Hawaii Symphony. She was recently named one of the 50 great conductors, past and present, by Gramophone magazine, and is hailed for her work as a conductor, recording artist, audience builder, and champion of American composers. Upon her appointment as music director of the Buffalo Philharmonic, Falletta became the first woman to lead a major American ensemble and has been credited with bringing the Philharmonic to an unprecedented level of national and international prominence. Her recent and upcoming North American guest conducting includes the National Symphony and the orchestras of Detroit, Nashville, Indianapolis, Houston, Toronto, Milwaukee, and Orchestre Metropolitain. Internationally, she has conducted many of the most prominent orchestras in Europe, Asia, and South America. This season, she is looking forward to guest conducting appearances in Canada, Poland, Sweden, and across the United States. With a discography of over 120 titles, Falletta is a leading recording artist for Naxos. She has won 2 individual Grammy Awards, and she has introduced over 600 works by American composers, including well over 150 world premieres. In 2019, JoAnn was named Performance Today's Classical Woman of the Year, calling her a tireless champion and lauding her unique combination of artistic authority and compassion, compelling musicianship, and humanity. Looking forward to our conversation now. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. And I just wanted to start this video blog interview with my first question, which is, why do you love conducting, and what inspires you to do what you do as a conductor?
Well, I fell in love with conducting when I was a little girl. I think I was 11 or 12, and I was going to a lot of concerts in addition to playing, but I was going to concerts and I just fell in love with the concept of the orchestra. I think, Dan, the idea of so many people being in one group, making something great happen together, different backgrounds, different ages, everything individual about them, but coming together. And I listened to this music and I thought that there's nothing better than being in the middle of that music. So, and when I started to actually conduct, after I'd gone to the conservatory and actually had a chance to start conducting, I just loved it more and more because it still is an extraordinary team. And to be in the middle of that team and to, in some way, create a landscape where they can be excellent, where they can be the musicians that they are. That is my dream, and that's my aim for them, is that I can establish an environment where excellence can flourish, and then it's up to them, and they do it. So I feel very lucky, and I love it. It's hard to describe sometimes what a conductor actually does. So sometimes it feels, sometimes it feels very serious and important. Sometimes it feels almost ridiculous. But just all the music that I've been in the middle of is like a treasure of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. So in particular, can you talk maybe a little bit about the music that inspires you? So, I mean, of course, I can imagine there would be particular pieces from all eras, but certainly I'd be interested to hear both historically and also possibly even contemporary music that
Sure.
inspires you.
Well, my background in studying conducting, first at the Mannes College of Music and then at Juilliard, was very, very traditional. And, we just studied Beethoven and Mozart and Dvorak, Tchaikovsky. I mean, it was really traditional. And one day when I was still at Juilliard, I got a call from the executive director of the Women's Philharmonic in San Francisco. And she asked me to come out and conduct a concert and see what they were up to. And she said to me, we perform, well, the only music we perform is music written by women. And I always laugh at myself, and I'm embarrassed to say that I said to her, "What music by women?" And I really didn't know. I had never, I guess I'd never heard a piece by a woman. I'd conducted once with a friend of mine, the Cecile Chaminade flute concerto. That was good. And she said, "Well, don't worry, come out and sing." And I went out and I stayed with them 10 years
Mhm.
because all of a sudden I realized that there was so much more music than I would ever learn in the world. That yes, it's great to study the Beethoven symphonies, but there's so much else out there that people didn't know. And of course, we did music from the past. I mean, the first concert I did with them had on it the Amy Beach Symphony, and that was a revelation to me. But we mostly did new music. Young women who were writing music. It's where I met Joan Tower for the first time, and Libby Larson, and Ellen Swillich, and um, all coming with new works for us to play. Um, and I think my whole idea about music changed with that. The idea that learning music, new music, is great. Being in the presence of a composer is an unbelievable honor. Because I had these women next to me, and we were working together, and I'm not a composer, so the idea that they would let me into their compositional process. They would sort of open the door and say, "Okay, can we try it this way? Or what do you think of this?" And I could actually be a small part of that. Uh, I just thought about music differently, and then that experience of playing 10 years of music by women, living and not, um, made me think about the classics in a different way too. I started to try and think about them as if they were new music, as if no one had played them before, as if there weren't any traditions that had become attached to them. But to go back to the score, always to go back to the score and try from that blueprint to see what the composer wanted. I mean, never really knowing, of course, but to try your best to get as close as that composer would have wanted. So it was just a very important step in my life, and I think that's colored the way I think about music now. And in these last 20 years with Buffalo, we work for Naxos. We make recordings for Naxos, and Klaus Heyman, the first thing he said was, "We're looking for an American orchestra and very interested in you in Buffalo, but we're not interested in another Brahms cycle. We're not interested in Beethoven symphonies. We're not interested in anything that we have," which was almost everything. And Klaus said to me, "Find something that people don't know. It doesn't have to be never played, but that it's not on stages. It's not widely known. It's not recorded, maybe, and it doesn't have to be new." In fact, what suited our orchestra was really more late romantic and post-romantic music. So that set me on a kind of I don't know, detective. I became like a detective. I was on a mission constantly to to find these works. So again, it amplified my interest in unusual pieces or new pieces, and I think it's just has been a great part of my life. Realizing that what we often hear on radio, what we hear even in concert halls, is only the smallest amount of music that there is.
So, yeah, this is very interesting what you mentioned. In particular, I think I'm interested in the audience reception side of this. So, um, because you're talking about how bringing music to audiences that people might not necessarily know. It could even be older, but it's unfamiliar. So, how do you sell a piece of music to the audience that they may not necessarily know?
That's the fun of it, especially when you're a music director and the audience gets to know you. They get to know what you did last year and what new things you're doing, and you make them part of this journey. They come to trust you. Now, does everyone look forward to a new piece? Maybe not, but most of the time they'll be willing to give it a chance. Most of the time they're willing to listen to it. A lot helped. It's helped a great deal if the composer is there with you and talking to them about what it meant to her or to him. Why was it written? What was the inspiration? What was happening in your life when you wrote this? Um, that really helps audiences because, sometimes I think we shortchange our audience. We think, oh, they wouldn't possibly understand, but they don't have to be musicians to understand the humanity of a piece of music. What is behind it, what comes from the heart of the composer into their heart, that they can understand. So it can be very successful for them to discover music, and even if they're not sure, and they may say, I don't know if I liked it, but I thought it was very interesting, and I like the composer's premise for writing the piece. And so it's a long process. That's what I can say, Dan. I guess when you're a music director, it's a long process that you build up trust from the audience. And in Buffalo was maybe a little easier for me because well, long ago, Lucas Foss was our music director. And
Mhm.
Lucas Foss, at the time he was in Buffalo, made Buffalo the epicenter of the new music world. I mean, absolutely wild, wild avant-garde music that I think confused everyone in Buffalo who didn't really know what was happening. But somehow the idea that the music world was paying attention to Buffalo was interesting to them. They didn't really know this music, but Lucas believed in it, and people came to hear it from everywhere. And he put the Buffalo Philharmonic on the musical map with his devotion and appetite and unwillingness to compromise. I mean, he really played a lot of new music. So the audience here is, I think, more open-minded than most, or more willing to listen. And in fact, I think now they might be disappointed at a sort of what we would always say like a meat and potatoes program, where all the three pieces, and they're all from the 19th century, and nothing wrong with those pieces. Those pieces are great. I mean, we have them on the seasons all the time, but I don't believe in that all kind of. I would like to put new music on programs because it's like planning a meal. You can't make everything sort of taste the same. I mean, each one has to sort of kind of talk to the other in a way, So the new piece maybe has something to say about the Beethoven they're about to hear, or vice versa. So that putting them on the same program is healthy and right, I think, and it shows that we're living in a time where music is alive and healthy. It's not, as they used to say many years ago, it ended with Brahms or ended with the end of the 1800s. Not at all. I mean, it's continually growing and adding to the repertoire in ways that reflect who we are. So I think they can actually start to find it exciting.
Well, and this is so wonderful because of, I mean, I love your food analogy there. I think it is very apropos, and thinking about different flavors makes me think of different aesthetic orientations in music. So, and of course, by that I'm meaning different styles, different approaches to writing. Do you have preferences for certain aesthetic orientations or styles in new music, or and what does that imply for your programming or for your audiences? Or are you more someone who likes a diversity of different styles for different purposes?
Well, the only thing that I like, that I look for, let's say, in a new piece, is some way of communicating to the audience. But that can be the widest variety. It can be, completely minimalistic to, extravagantly orchestrated, to something that uh, almost has no sense of architecture and just floats. But it has to communicate something to the audience. And again, they may leave the hall not being able to explain what it was, but they are touched in some way. I mean, that's it. And I think, at least in the time I've been conducting, composers have happily gone in many different directions. They're all different directions, and been successful in all different directions. And so I suppose, if when I try and drill down about what makes sense to me, is some sort of structure that they have in mind. I mean, that the piece has an architecture of some sort, but it certainly doesn't have to be sonata allegro form, not at all. But has some architecture in the way they think about it, and that they know how to use the orchestra in a way that enhances their message. That they are able to achieve the colors they want, or are learning to achieve the colors they want. And that's why one of the reasons I think it's so important to play new music is that um, it's hard for a composer to write in a vacuum. If they don't hear their music, it's very hard for them to go to the next step. And that's been true forever. I mean, Beethoven would never have written his Ninth Symphony if he didn't hear the other eight. You know,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
you build on what you hear and what you change and how musicians respond to your music. So being part of that development process, especially for American composers, since we're American orchestras and we're living in this country, that's a privilege to do that. That's a privilege to give them the chance to hear and change, uh, and um, and maybe make a very big step towards something that they understand about themselves through hearing it played.
Hmm. Absolutely. And, and speaking to the diversity of styles that you mentioned too, um, I think it's also an interesting experience for the audiences as well, to be able to be exposed to such a wide variety. And something again, though, that is going to be significant or meaningful, or use the orchestra in um, a dramatic way, or significant way. Um, so this sort of leads pretty well into my next question, which is, in what ways do you think conductors should be interacting with contemporary composers, and what does this imply for the future of classical or whatever music we want to call it? And the reason why I ask is because there are many conductors with a lot of different approaches to interacting with living composers. I mean, some avoid them at all costs, and then others embrace them entirely. And was just wondering, what you think is sort of healthiest for the field.
Well, the only healthy thing is to embrace them entirely. Imagine if we could just ask Beethoven a question about something, we'd be thrilled to hear whatever he had to say. I mean, I think embracing them is the only way to make a commitment to that piece. And in Women's Philharmonic, where we did so much new music, I realized that composers were very different. Some of them were very sure about what they had written and felt that that was exactly what they wanted. Some were not so sure. Some were very resistant to change or to trying something different. Like if I would say, "Could you think I could move the tempo here in this spot?" They would say, "No, I don't want it exactly." Or some were very open. Say, "Well, let me hear it. Let's try it." So that's a fun thing. I mean, every composer is different, but every composer wants the same thing. They want their music to speak. They want the music to open up and blossom. So, and why not ask them? It's wonderful too when we have a composer with us, which is quite often, to let the musicians encourage them to ask the composer themselves. Um, this note is not going to be able to really sound fortissimo on that register, but I can take it up an octave and hear the composer say, "No, I don't want. I want it more to sort of have the sense that you're playing fortissimo. It doesn't have to actually be fortissimo, but for the musician to understand that the composer is thinking in a very profound way, and to speak to them." Uh, we had John Coriano with us when we were recording some of his music, and John is so hands-on. He would go up to every person and tell them exactly how he wants them to play. And it was, I mean, it was challenging for people, but in one way it was wonderful. But you heard it from John himself. That's what he wanted. It was incredible. So why miss that opportunity? I think a lot of times the mistakes conductors make, and myself included, is um, then you don't allow enough time for the new piece, because that is critical. I mean, I've really learned this, that you don't put a new piece that's 10 minutes, even though you don't know how difficult it's going to be, but it's 10 minutes, it's 15 minutes, and then you have a very difficult Mahler symphony after that. That doesn't make sense. Leave rehearsal time and rehearsal energy for the new piece, so that you can lavish extra time on it, rather than trying to squeeze it in and do it halfway. Because having something only come up to a certain level because of time constraints doesn't do anything for the composer, and it doesn't do anything for the audience. They don't sense the cohesion that is necessary in any piece. I mean, it would be like, just running through a difficult symphony and then playing it, and it doesn't make sense. So the commitment has to be to this dialogue that's going on in the concert between the new piece and the standard concerto, and maybe the early 20th century symphony or something like that. So that there's different levels of complexity. Um, but I think that new music sometimes offers so many surprises. Even when you do it a lot, something that you think is going to be very difficult to put together comes together quickly, and the musicians seem to embrace it. Something else that surprises you at how difficult it is, and how the musicians struggle to get to the point where they feel, oh, I see, that's how it works. But those pieces, the ones that we struggle with, sometimes are the ones that we love the most, because in the end, we see what the point was. Sometimes, we just, if it's too simple and we're wondering, well, but but if we have enough time to live with it, and I think that's very, very important. For the composer, I mean, some composers, this always makes me sad when they say, "Oh, I'll just come to the concert." So, well, the concert, okay, but we want you. We can't. You can't tell us anything in the concert, or even the dress rehearsal. Since we're so limited in time, we have to play everything on the dress rehearsal. That means the composer can only mention a couple of quick things. Um, I would love for them to be there at the first rehearsal. Some of them will say to me, "Oh, I never go to the first rehearsal," and I guess I can understand that too. Just to have us work out some of the explanations or difficulties. But the more we have them, the truer our voice can be for them.
Mm. So, yeah, you said a lot in there that I wanted to follow up on. It's so wonderful hearing these perspectives. One of the things you mentioned was the idea of this being a collaborative process with the composer, and the composer, you're talking with them about what they want or what works, or maybe, the musicians say, well, maybe this would work a little better in this register or whatever. And it sounds like a wonderful process that you go through. And I was thinking about it from my own experience. When I work as a composer, I try my hardest to make the score as perfect as possible, because I know rehearsal time is so limited. And because, of course, especially if it's an orchestra that's never played my music before, I want to make a good impression, right? I don't want to come across as someone who, doesn't know what I'm writing for the instrument or whatever. And so then it's interesting, though, to hear that it still could be a process, even though I have been in rehearsals myself where, okay, yeah, I decided, yeah, maybe that does need to change, or the conductor said, yeah, maybe make a modification or whatever. But it sounds like it's a more sort of open exchange, or sharing of ideas in some of the rehearsals that you've led sometimes, and I'm curious to hear a little more about that.
Well, it can be, and I think, though, Dan, I think what you're saying is right too. If you deliver to the musicians parts in a score that are clearly marked, that don't have things that are unplayable. A lot of times we get things that are truly unplayable, and the person just hasn't realized that the contra can't play that high or something like.
Right.
So and that the everything is marked clearly, the accidentals are marked clearly, the bar numbers are right. I mean, sometimes you get a newcomer to it who doesn't even have the correct bar numbers. That is not good generally, because then the musicians get a little frustrated.
Right.
Well, why didn't she fix these things up? But so that your approach is great. I mean, if you give them the cleanest, clearest directions, and because they have that, then we can go to the next level of depth. We
Right.
can see what you want, and we can play it for you. And then you can tell us whether you might want a doubling there. Or a lot of times a composer will say to me, I thought it would be more dramatic there. I thought it would be more forceful, but I'm not really getting that.
Mhm.
Why, what can we do? Or it may be a question of just adding another instrument or changing a register, or even just coming back to piano and going up again. I mean, any kind of thing we can try for them there, and that's good. But that's presupposing, as you do, that everything is clear in the parts, so we know what we're working from,
Hmm.
and allowing enough time in rehearsal so that exchange can happen. And I think that the idea is also to make the musicians feel invested in the work. If they play it through once and the composer says, "Okay, see you at the concert," it's like, well, all right, But if they want to hear what the composer thinks, they want to hear
Yeah.
what the composer thinks, and what she wants, what he wants, and it's, again, as I said, it's a privilege for us non-composers to be a part of that process, to hear what you are thinking as you're hearing it. Um, what are you thinking as the creator of this piece? It really gives us a glimpse into a very intriguing world. So starting from clear, good parts is a great thing, and then it just allows us to not waste time in rehearsal fixing things, but we can use the rehearsal time to have you experiment in the way you want us to experiment with you.
Which is a wonderful luxury if the time permits, which is
Right,
it's
right.
good. Yeah. And it made me also think, do you prefer to study a score of a new work first without any um, discussion with the composer? Or do you like to study the score and talk with the composer throughout the score study process? Because I've worked with musicians who do
Right,
both.
right. I usually do it more leaving the composer on their own. I mean, if we're commissioning a piece, like we just commissioned a piece for two double basses and orchestra for first stand-up basses, a double bass concerto, and the composer knew what we've actually had a meeting. It was wonderful with our two soloists, the composer and myself, talking through what they wanted and how they felt about playing this, and he was able to ask some questions like, "Do you like to improvise?" And there was a little silence, and they said, "Well, if you write it out, we can play it, but please don't ask us to compose." So to get the sort of ground rules. Okay, he wants they're open for anything. They're open for even tuning a detuned bass. If he wants that, open for whatever he wants, but they would prefer not to improvise because that's not a skill that they have. So some ground rules, and then he's been sharing with us one movement at a time, but most of the time I get the score uh, without knowing what's happening. I mean, they may tell me, "I think we agree on the shape of it." Let's say we're looking for a 22-minute or 20 to 25-minute piece, so they
Right.
don't feel too. And for this size orchestra, and it's not unusual that in the middle of it they'll call and say, I think I just need. I think I'm going to need the controversy, and I didn't think I wanted it, but I think I need it. Can we get one? Yes, we can. So we try and limit it, because sometimes I would get scores sent to me that were for, a huge chorus and, a 150-piece orchestra. And, the idea of it was wonderful, and you could tell the person really thought it out, but we can't do that. It's just not possible for us. So just some sort of kind of housekeeping details of how big is it, how long is it, does it have a soloist, is it purely orchestral, and then it's always sort of a surprise when I get it. But I like that, and then I like to spend time with the score for a while. I sometimes ask the composer, although I don't always find it helpful, but in a way it's helpful if they have made a MIDI demo of it. Um, some are very well done, some are less well done. Some programs are just more sophisticated than others. But it gives me a nice sense of what tempo they're thinking about, and not always that tempo is going to be the tempo that we play it at, but it gives me a sense of what they're thinking.
Mhm.
So just again, another window into their mind before I actually meet them on the stage. Um, I'll ask them a lot of questions before. We usually meet before and talk through the score, and I get a better sense. But most of the work, Dan, actually happens in the rehearsals when the musicians are playing. Because
Mhm.
I think as much as the composer hears that work in their head or plays it on the piano or it's always a surprise. There's
Oh
always
yeah.
some surprise, and that just like the sound, the physical sound of the orchestra is different, a little different than they expected. Um, and that's great. I mean, if they're surprised, we're happy. We're happy that they're surprised. And if they're surprised in a way that is not really what their intention was, we can help them fix it.
Hmm.
So that's a great thing. So, but again, being a non-composer, I would never want to like sort of sit with them as they're writing the score saying, I don't know, I'm not sure if I really like that line. No, no, it's I wouldn't do that anyway. But
Sure.
and then the challenge is is again to bring it to life in the way they envisioned it.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's really interesting to think about the score study process that you outlined, and then of course the rehearsal. Um, and when you study a new score, so it's delivered to you, and it's a surprise, which is usually it's a good
Right.
surprise. And
Yeah.
what do you like to look for? And I know it's hard to generalize, but what do you like to look for when you're studying a new score?
Well, the thing I look for is actually I think the most difficult thing in some cases, and that is the structure, the overall structure, because I like to look at a score first from uh, the biggest sense of it down to the details. I don't really like to start a score with like measure one and then go to measure 612. Um, I mean that's the journey I will take, of course, but not at the beginning. I want to get a sense of what's the building like? I mean, what is this? What does it mean? Are there parts that have to connect? Um, what was the composer thinking in terms of time elapsing? The sort of projection of the piece, and that sometimes is hard because people have very different ways of expressing that. But that's what I try. I try and look at it from the largest structure. And if I get a sense of that it's in a two-part structure or it's a three-part structure, and but the third part is truncated and not quite the same as the first, or then I can get a sense of it, and then I go into much smaller detail of how those parts relate to each other. And sometimes the composer can help you, and they'll tell you a sense of what they were thinking about, what they were aiming for, and
Mhm.
even in poetic terms, some people are very poetic, some people are more theoretical about what they're thinking. So, but to start with some sense of the sort of I guess the architectural image of this piece,
Mhm.
and then go into small detail.
Yeah, well, and that's, of course, at least from my perspective as a composer, that's a very I love it when performers, conductors, or whatever seek to understand it in those kinds of terms. Because of course, working with different kinds of musicians, I mean, there are some musicians are more technically oriented and they don't always like to look at certain structures or whatever. Although as a conductor, I would imagine you can't get away with not knowing the construction of it. But so certainly having the big picture and then going down to the detailed level and how the motives may unfold or the more
Right,
micro forms.
right,
That's certainly it's wonderful. And then you also mentioned the issue of composers who approach their writing from more emotional or imagery perspectives on imagery or whatever versus a more theoretical orientation. Um, when you're working with new music, does it matter to you what kind of music you're working on? Music that's more theoretically oriented, or music that's um, more poetic or more imagery oriented, or something like that? Or does it not matter? Is it wonderful to work with all sorts?
yeah. I think it doesn't matter because I know that some composers, I have a feeling that some composers have images in their mind or connections to their life that they're making when they're writing this, but they don't necessarily want to share that. Then they don't have to. There are other composers who have a very and can be very eloquent about explaining w- the poetry of the piece and what they're thinking. Sometimes maybe too much, I think, and that they explain it. We do something called June in Buffalo, where we play for at the end of their big concert, and the composers talk about the piece, and that's the first time we hear what they were thinking of. And sometimes the descriptions are so extraordinarily poetic and sheerly beautiful, and we've just played a piece that doesn't seem to reflect that at all. So it sometimes it there's a kind of disconnect there. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if but if they want to share that, this this to me is like a scream in someone's life, and or this is the moment of a turning point in my life here, and not describe what it is. We're very happy to know about that. So I mean, composers are different in every way. I mean, about how they want to express it, and how much they want to share, and that doesn't matter, because the words are okay if you want to share in words what the piece is like, but ultimately it's the music that has to speak for itself. So that's and that can speak. It's a language that people understand but can't reciprocate. They understand, they're moved, they're changed inside, they're they start to think, but they can't tell you why or what it meant. And I think there's something so wonderful about music. It's so amorphous,
Hmm.
yet it touches us so deeply.
Hmm.
So, really up to the composer. Audiences often ask, what does it mean? What does that mean? And sometimes composers are willing to help them think through something. And at other times they want them to make the journey on their own.
Sure. And the diversity of composers there is really quite wonderful. So, you never have just one approach with one composer, and then the audience gets um, the diversity, and the audience gets a wide range of experiences. Well, I really appreciate you taking this time to talk with me about these various facets of what inspires you, and how working with living composers works into your work as a conductor. And I really appreciate it, and was wondering if you had any other just final thoughts on this subject that you might want to share, or.
Well, just that I think it's important that we teach young students from the very beginning to become champions of new music.
Mm.
And sometimes in conservatories, their teachers are always putting right in front of them the pieces they learned and the pieces that are important. Yes, and those pieces are important, but you have to give them an appetite for the piece that your friend is writing, and
Mm.
and being his champion, or helping bring a voice back to life that was forgotten because of the war or something. So I think it's important to give that appetite to young people and to make them realize how exciting that can be in their life. And so I hope teachers will do that more and more, because I think the young people who do that think about all the music they play differently. They really do. So.